what if a sacred text from 1400 years ago and our most cutting-edge theories in physics are actually describing the very same reality? I know, it's a huge claim, but as we're about to see, the parallels between how the Qur'an describes existence and the wild principles of quantum mechanics, well, they're pretty hard to just ignore. Let's dive in and see if these two worlds are really telling one universal story. So this is really the big question for us today, isn't it? Are we looking at two completely separate ways of thinking? Or could it be that scripture and science are just two different languages trying to explain the same fundamental blueprint of our universe? Let's take a look at the evidence and see where it takes us. All right, so first things first, let's get our heads around the Quranic model of reality. According to the source material we're looking at, existence isn't just some straight line from a beginning to an end. No, it's actually a dynamic three-stage cycle that's always in motion. And here's that cycle in a nutshell. It kicks off with descent, which is like the initial spark of divine will. Then you have manifestation. That's the world we live in, our actual experience. And finally, it all wraps up with return, where all consciousness heads back to where it came from. The key thing to get, though, is that these aren't separate steps. Think of it more like one single, seamless cosmic flow. So let's break down that first stage, descent. This verse talks about a divine command. The word in Arabic is amr, that gets the whole ball of creation rolling. This isn't a physical thing. It's more like an impulse of pure potential, an unmanifested energy that holds the blueprint for literally everything that will ever exist. Next up is manifestation, where the soul actually enters our world of space and time. And this verse is just fascinating. It says every soul shows up with a driver and a witness. Now, the driver is said to represent the laws of cause and effect that shape our reality, while the witness, well, that's our own awareness, our consciousness, watching it all unfold. This is the stage of doing, of experiencing, of interacting. And that brings us to the final stage, the return. This verse describes an ascension, a journey back to the divine source. But what's actually returning? It's not just the soul, but all the information, all the experiences it gathered along the way. Nothing gets lost. Everything is preserved as it completes the cycle and dissolves back into its origin. And this right here is the main takeaway. These aren't three separate events. They form a single, continuous loop of existence. Divine will comes down, life happens, and consciousness returns. And according to this framework, that cycle is repeating constantly for every single atom and every single soul in the universe. Okay, so we have this ancient spiritual framework. Now here's where it gets really interesting. What if this cycle has a direct parallel in modern science? This is where we turn to the totally weird and wonderful world of quantum physics. And you might be shocked by how closely it mirrors what we've just been talking about. Now, to really see the parallel, we have to understand a concept from quantum mechanics that is bizarre but absolutely fundamental: wave function collapse. So imagine a particle before we've looked at it. Physics tells us it doesn't really have a specific location. Instead, it exists as a wave of all possible locations at once, a field of pure potential. But the very second we measure it, that wave of possibilities instantly collapses into one single concrete point. The potential becomes actual. The second big idea is entanglement, something Einstein called spooky action at a distance. Picture two particles that are linked. They're linked in such a way that if you measure one, you instantly know the state of the other, even if they're on opposite sides of the universe. Their fates are intertwined. And when these particles interact with the world around them, they lose some of that quantum weirdness in a process called decoherence. It's this interaction that helps create the solid, everyday reality we all experience. And this slide, well, it brings it all together. And the parallels are just startling. The Quranic descent of a command into a physical form, that sounds an awful lot like the quantum wave function collapsing from pure potential into a real particle. The manifestation with its driver of cause and effect and its witness of observation, that's a perfect mirror of how entanglement and decoherence create our reality through interaction. And the return of all information back to the source, that lines up perfectly with a fundamental law of physics. Information can never be destroyed, only transformed. But believe it or not, the parallels go even deeper. And this next connection might be the most mind-bending of all. It has to do with how this cycle describes time itself. Because as we're about to see, the Quran seems to suggest that time isn't a constant, a concept that science wouldn't catch up to for another 1,300 years. So for that first part of the cycle, the descent into our material world, the verse gives a specific time scale. It says a day for this process, measures 1,000 years by our human counting. Okay, just remember that number, 1,000 years. But then, for the return journey, the ascension back to the source, the verse gives a completely different measure, a day that equals 50,000 years. So what's up with that huge difference? 1,000 years to come down, but 50,000 to go back up? It seems like a contradiction until you bring Einstein into the picture. The interpretation proposed by the source material is stunning. These aren't supposed to be literal time frames, but descriptions of the same reality from two different perspectives. The 1,000 years represents the slow, plodding time that matter experiences, the particle dimension we all live in. The 50,000 years, a much faster rate, represents the nearly instantaneous experience of light, the wave dimension. And this is the core of Einstein's theory of relativity. Time is not absolute. It flows differently for an object with mass than it does for a particle of light. It seems the Qur'an is describing relativistic time centuries before it was ever proven with math. So, if the Qur'an and quantum physics are describing the same fundamental process, can we actually combine them? Could we write a single, unified equation for existence that works for both? Well, here's what that unified process might look like. First, the divine command descends as pure energy. Then, that energy interacts with the basic building blocks of our world, symbolized here as water and dust, and that's what creates life. And finally, that life, with all the information it gathered, ascends back to the source as spirit, or pure light. And this gives us a kind of universal formula. Command leads to creation, which sparks consciousness, which then completes the cycle in its return. The most profound idea here is that this isn't just a story about the beginning and end of time. The source material suggests this is happening continuously, for every atom and every soul, in every single moment. So when you step back, the points where these two systems agree are undeniable. They both say, 1, that information is never lost, it's just transformed. 2, that time is relative, not some fixed constant ticking away. And 3, that creation wasn't a one-time event in the past, but it's a continuous, ongoing process. These aren't small overlaps, these are deep structural agreements. So let's zoom out one last time just to really grasp the biggest implication of this whole framework, because it really does change how you think about life, death, and, well, reality itself. If we had to boil this entire massive concept down to one single sentence, it would be this: energy becomes matter, and then matter returns as information. That's it. That's the whole circuit of existence. And this leads us to a really radical reimagining of life and death. In this model, creation and resurrection aren't a one-time beginning and a one-time end. They're two sides of the same coin, opposite phases of one single eternal cycle. It's like the universe breathing in and breathing out. It's the quantum wave collapsing into a particle and that particle dissolving back into the wave. And this final verse just captures the entire idea with such poetic beauty. To him belongs the origin and the return. It suggests the beginning and the end aren't two separate points on a line, but part of a single, unified reality, a continuous, divine loop where the end is really just a return to the beginning. And it leaves you with a final thought to ponder. Are we living in a universe of things or a universe of processes?